Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Kirby Player. I'm the CAFLS FACE representative. FACE is the Faculty Committee for the Advancement of Ethics here at Clemson University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural TIDE Conference, which stands for Tigers for Inclusion, Diversity, and Ethics. This portion of the TIDE Conference is directly related to areas of interest in the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Life Sciences. We have an excellent program for you today featuring Dr. Maria Navarro from the University of Georgia. We'll also have comments from Erica Waring, who is a junior in agricultural education here at Clemson University and is the representative student member for the Student Committee for Change that you'll learn from the Rutland Institute. We also will have comments from Dr. Jean Bertrand, the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies here at Clemson University, and Julian Nixon, who is the Director for Diversity in the William B. Bookhart Student Services Center. So we're glad each of you can join us today. A couple of housekeeping matters. This is a webinar, which means that your question and answers can be entered into the chat area, and then Eric and myself will offer those questions to Dr. Navarro at the end of her presentation. So if you have a question during her time, enter that, but we will not respond to questions until the conclusion of her presentation. Also remember that there will be, at the end of this webinar when you leave, we'll be sending you a survey to get feedback from you so we can continue to improve the TIDE conference, as well as we'll have some other announcements and information that we'll be able to share with you that will come. So please feel free to enter those questions do that. I do see a question in the chat of if there's any way to validate your attendance today. If you do need validation for attendance, I can see participant screen. So if you would send an email to me at kplayer@clemson.edu. My first initial, K for Kirby, and then player@clemson.edu. I can make sure to send you confirmation of your attendance today, students, if you need that. So very good question. So please, any other questions you have or needs, you can put that in the Q&A, and Eric and I will share that. But at this time, would like to give control to Erica Waring, who's going to share information for you about the Change Committee, as well as introduce our distinguished speaker for today. Erica.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Player. So as Dr. Player just mentioned, this event is sponsored by the Rutland Institute for Ethics. And if this is something you have a great interest in and you are a current student, please let me know. You have the ability to join, apply into our student component. It's called Change, which stands for Creating Habits and Norms Guiding Ethical Decision Making. So we accept both graduate and undergraduate students, and we put on program both specific to CAFLS as well as university-wide that gets students thinking more about ethics. So please email me if you have any interest in that. I am dropping my email in the chat box so you can copy that down. I would love to share with you more about our organization and get you that application. So now I have the absolute honor of introducing our presenter for today, Dr. Maria Navarro. Dr. Maria Navarro has worked in international development, agricultural education and training of higher education faculty in the United States, Europe, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Oceania, and Western Asia. She completed an undergraduate degree in agricultural engineering and then worked in the International Center for Advanced Mediterranean Agronomic Studies until she moved to the United States to complete her PhD in agricultural education at Texas A&M University. Dr. Navarro has been on the faculty at the University of Georgia since 2005, where she's a professor in the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication. In 2018, she became the Associate Director of the UGA Honors Program and the Center for Undergraduate Research Opportunities. Navarro's favorite part of her job is teaching and working with students, as well as her research on teaching and learning focused on interdisciplinary education. An outstanding teacher and education scholar, Dr. Navarro has received numerous awards, two that she's most proud of being the 2012 United States Department of Agriculture National New Teacher Award and the 2018 Fellow of the Association for International Agricultural and Extension Education. The course she teaches that she believes has the most impact on students is one on global food security. Dr. Navarro is from Barcelona, Spain, and has two teenage sons. Please help me in welcoming, in our Zoom claps, Dr. Navarro to present with us today. Dr. Navarro.
Thank you so much, Erica. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm going to say before I get started, thank you so much for inviting me to do that. It's I have passion for food security and passion for teaching. So when I was asked to do this, I said, if I can talk about how do we work with students to be able to look at food security with a new lens, to analyze their preconceived notions about what hunger means, then I'm very happy to do that. So what I want to do today is essentially, I don't think I'm going to answer any questions. I think I'm going to raise more questions. I want you to think about food security from different perspectives, from different lenses, to ask more questions. And probably you're going to end more confused, but more ready to understand the problem and more ready to tackle the problem in your communities, in the world, academically, in practice, or in action. And I encourage you to explore and continue to explore and continue to be confused. And the more confused you are, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to do something about it. Sorry, no solutions for the moment, just tools for you to be able to take action. So let me get started. I have many slides, but I want to go fast because they are in some cases just some images I want you to be considering. Let me share the screen. All right. All right, so you should be able to see the presentation. So the title that I have given to the presentation is Teaching Students, and I am going to put my timer because if not, you could have me here until tomorrow night. I like this topic very much, but don't worry, I'm going to be very careful with our time. So the title that I have given is Teaching Students About Food Security and then Uncovering a World of Inequalities. I have 3 learning objectives today. First, I would like you to be able to examine critical diversity elements impacting the discussions about food security. Then I would like you to analyze the different dimensions of global food security. And finally, I want to discuss some examples of food security inequalities. So as my first objective on examining critical diversity elements impacting discussions about food security, I want to give you the idea that I have 5 elements or diversity elements I would like you to consider. So when you talk about diversity with people, when you discuss, when you think, when you read, I want you to start thinking about the different elements, the different connotations, the different question marks that you need to be raising on those discussions. The first one is going to be the need for communication. It is impossible to talk about, it is impossible to solve problems of food security without proper communication. The first step of communication is to even know what we're talking about. So when I say Food security, what do I mean by food security? Or when I say hunger, what do I mean by hunger? Does it mean that I didn't eat today and I'm hungry? Or does it mean that I have a persistent situation in which I'm food insecure and it is not just a one-day thing, it's a 1 month? So it's important that we understand what we're talking about, because if you are talking about, I'm hungry today because I didn't have breakfast, but I'm talking about a long-term persistent food insecurity situation that is threatening my life, we are not really talking about the same thing. Therefore, the solutions are not going to be the same. The other thing regarding communication is that we're going to solve nothing, we're going to address nothing without proper collaboration between all actors in food security. And the collaboration needs to be on equal terms of power. And that's one of the big problems that we have in solving food security, that collaboration is not, it does not give equal power to everybody. So I call these an issue of co-creation. It's not about some people having a problem and others giving them the solution. It is a situation where everybody needs to participate together to create that solution, to understand the problem and create the solution. And then another important thing is that we need to communicate to understand the differences between symptoms and causes. And this is something very important. I teach in the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. I studied agricultural engineering. So I tended, at the beginning, when I started working on food security, I tended to look at everything from a problem of food production. So for me, the cause was the lack of proper agriculture, or I saw hunger and I always thought more food production or more food is needed. And I did not recognize the difference between the cause of a problem and the symptom of a problem. So it's important to realize that not all situations of hunger or food insecurity are caused by the same cause. So that differentiation between symptoms and causes can only happen if we collaborate, if we communicate, and then if we together find solutions to the problems. The next issue is the perspective. And the perspective can be from different perspectives: disciplinary perspective, experience, knowledge. So I have some very fast images for you, so you remember what I talk about perspective. So the first one is an issue of what lens do we use to see the world? What lens do we use to look at problems of food security? When I was preparing for this presentation, I'm a visual learner, right? So I wanted to see, how can I show them visually what do I mean by perspective? What do I mean by lenses by which we look at the world? Which is an essential issue of diversity. Diversity brings this idea that people look at the world from different perspectives, from different lenses. And I saw this artist duo, they call themselves Karnofsky, and they have these two quotes that are awesome. One of them says, the art of that is hidden in plain sight, and then they say, what we see for the first time may hide other meanings. And that's very important when we analyze hunger, because what you see the first time might not be really what is happening. And then the other one is there is still the chance to discover new worlds. So let me show you one example of their art. So they have something like this. So I want everybody to look at this for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Now close your eyes. I do want you to close your eyes. The image is black. And think, what did you see? Let me show it to you again. 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, close your eyes and think, what did you see? Really, now, it's like if you were in my class, that would be homework. You would have to put this in your notes, okay? What did you see? And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to think about it. Okay, so now some of you did see this. I know many of you saw that. Some of you only saw one thing. Some of you saw several things. Some of you saw this. Some of you saw this. Some of you saw this and this. And then some of you also saw this. But many of you probably didn't see the monkeys. Most of you probably didn't see the monkeys. Some of you didn't see these. So we see people that see the world with different perspectives, with different lenses. Think about it in terms of the perspectives of those lenses, that there's a wide diversity of people that see the world with different filters. And these filters help them engage with the world. We can only solve complex problems if we can integrate and we can join those diversity of people that have different lenses to be able to, with their experience, analyze problems and solve problems. So when you think about perspective, think about this idea of people looking at different lenses, engaging with the world differently, and helping find solutions to the world. We would never be able to see the three images if we didn't have a diversity of people. Another issue of diversity and perspective would be that perspective from a different perspective, okay? So many of you might have seen this image. Some of you see the young lady, some of you see the old lady, some of you see both. Most of you saw one at the beginning, but you can train yourselves, you can teach yourselves to see both of them. Right now, I immediately see both of them because I've trained myself. Because this can be learned, that is the perspective of the different disciplines, if you wish. So we cannot solve problems, we cannot evaluate problems unless we have a variety of people and a variety of abilities to analyze problems from different disciplines. So think about the old lady and the young lady. Some people might be bringing social sciences, education, STEM, agriculture, policy, international affairs, infrastructure. So you have to have these different disciplines to solve a problem. And then I have another example of different perspective with the following images. As soon as you see what you are looking at, I would ask you raise your hand, but just note how many slides it took you to actually see this image. So if I ask you, what are you seeing here? Most of you might not recognize what you see in this image. I next show you the next one. And you know what I'm doing here, right? I'm bringing the camera closer. Well, the camera is very close to the image, and then I'm separating the camera away and away from the image. The next slide will be these. Some of you might have seen what this is. Now most of you see this, and now all of you probably know what I'm talking about. So the first perspective is this idea of looking at the problem so close to yourself that you might not be able to recognize what it is or what it means. And then when it separates from you, you might be able to see what it means. So we cannot analyze problems unless we have people who look at the problem very close to see if there is a problem of a fungus or a bacteria. And then people who look at the problem from a very long, wide perspective. So we need to have, when we analyze problems, the perspective of analytical depth and breadth. Sometimes a problem is better understood for those who are close to the problem, by the people who are hungry. However, sometimes you need to take a step back, a 33 bird's view of the problem to be able to solve that problem. That tells me that to address hunger, we need the diversity of grassroots, of community engagement, indigenous knowledge, expert knowledge. All the perspectives are valuable. From perspective, we go to context. You've seen many times this idea and this message that context is important. So the context is important from a very integral issue of food security. Let me give you the image that really reminds me of not forgetting that context matters. Many of you might have seen this image in the past, the two dogs, okay? So if I ask you which dog is bluer, you know the answer is both dogs are the same. You know that I'm showing you this picture because I want to tell you that context matters, and you know perfectly that I'm going to tell you both dogs are the same color. You know, because that's the trick, right? Showing you that context matters. But you look at it and man, I know both dogs are the same. I really do know that both dogs are the same, but I still don't believe it. I still do not believe those dogs are the same color blue because the context obscures the reality. If I show you the next picture, you see, so what I did is from this image, I took away the background and now the two dogs are here. And you can see that both dogs have the same color. So context matters. You might have seen it like this. Squares A and B are exactly the same color. Look, I know they are the same color, but I'm looking at it and I don't believe it. So I did cut and take away the squares sideways, and here they are the same color. And for those of you who do not believe this, let me show you. Okay, so you're seeing this screen. This is A, and I'm going to bring A here, and this is B, and I bring B here. Same color, okay? And if I do the dogs, I'm going to show you these two dogs. This is the dog. I bring it here. It's this dog, same color, and then I bring it here, and it's the same color. So we know context matters, but it's still very difficult for us to realize and train ourselves to differentiate between what it is that we see and what is the context obscuring what we see. All right, so this is the idea of context. There are many more examples of context, but I want you to remember that context matters, and you need to understand in each situation what it is that you are looking. Where is it that we are looking? Who is talking about it? Why are they talking about it? With whom are they talking about it? Those W questions about each situation is important. That takes me to the next thing. It depends. Most of you are students, some of you are faculty, some of you are visitors, but students, you know that probably your professors do not allow you to give the answer, it depends. They say, you need to take a stand. The reality is that most problems, the answer is it depends. But you need to be able to say it depends on what, or why does it depend? What are the situations? What happens if this? So you need to go further than just saying it depends. But you need to learn that it depends is the reality of complex problems, the reality of food security. The solutions that you have in a specific situation are not going to be the same ones in a different situation. The solutions to food security in Metro Atlanta are not the same ones in South Georgia. They are not the same ones in Spain, and they are not the same ones in Ghana, Fiji, or Ecuador. They are not the same ones. However, what we learn working in food security in any of these places can inform our thinking, our analytical process in other places. So it's important to bring the knowledge from people in all facets to be able to address solutions. So that idea of being able to say it depends and being able to explain why it depends is very important. And that's one of the essence issues of diversity, right? Many people are going to give you different explanations on why it depends, because people are going to see context different, and I am going to have an experience of context that is different from yours. All right, next is going to be power. We cannot talk about food security, we cannot talk about solving food security or about the origins, and we cannot understand food security unless we accept that food insecurity is surrounded and created in a way by an unbalance of power. We need to understand privilege, we need to understand our own privilege, we need to understand equity, and we need to understand food sovereignty and decision-making and choices. So we cannot talk about diversity without understanding that power unbalances determine a lot of what's happening. So in terms of power, I wanted to address two things. One of them is understand what the issue of food sovereignty means. And I'm going to read you the definition by the first Global Forum on Food Sovereignty. And it says, food sovereignty is the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. It puts the aspirations and needs of those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of food systems and policies, rather than the demands of markets and corporations. This is one thing that is important in terms of power, is putting the choice of the healthy and culturally appropriate foods in the people rather than a market system, if you wish. The other thing in terms of power that is very important, it's a narrative that it's a dichotomy that it's very important to understand when we talk about poverty, when we talk about inequality, when we talk about food security and hunger in the United States or abroad. And it's this idea of how do we understand a problem of poverty, of inequality, of hunger? Do we understand it with a narrative of a person blame, or do we understand it with a narrative of system blame? Or are we in the middle? So by person blame, let's think about the United States, and let's take it out of hunger in terms of many people accept the idea that the United States is the land of opportunities, that if you work hard enough in the United States, you are going to go over and you're going to solve your problems, and you're going to get educated and get in a better social standing. So it's this idea that personal investment, engagement, growth, education, effort, work is going to help you. It's the idea that if you do not accomplish something, it's because you didn't work hard enough. This is the idea of the person blame, right? It's in a positive way. You work hard enough, you'll accomplish something. But it also has the connotation that you didn't accomplish something because you didn't work hard enough. We all have espoused this perspective 1 or 2 or 3 times. I'm a parent, right? And I tell my kids, you need to work hard enough. You will learn this lesson and you will get an A in this class if you work hard enough. So we all have espoused this, and we are educated, many of us, with this perspective. However, when we look at problems, when we look at poverty, when we look at hunger, when we look at health disparities, when we look at who was more affected by COVID-19, we cannot analyze a problem with this sole person blame perspective on problems. We need to also understand that the system is a system that it goes against certain groups, and no matter how much harder or better or more they work, they are conditioned by the system to a situation that is out of their hands. So the issue here is to understand that you have to think about narratives in different situations, in different moments. And if you take just a person blame approach to food security, you're never going to solve a problem in the world, because the system perspective is super important. All right. And then many of you have heard in the system blame and in the person blame narrative words that you don't really know what it means. I saw the other day this cartoon. It's not mine. Some of the images I have, it's not mine, but I really liked it, because some people don't understand, for example, the difference between equality and equity. Equality does not mean that you are solving a system problem, because equality is not what addresses the system failures to address problems. The next step would be equity, but the reality is that if we change the system completely, rather than just fixing little things, we need to get to a situation of liberation. So if we think about words that we use in those narratives, those would be 3 words, and I did like this cartoon to explain this situation. All right, so in terms of the objective 1, I have one more, which is the idea of complexity. Food security and diversity within food security and food security inequality is a very complex problem, and it's not easy. I'm thinking about, and this is to put a little bit of humor into the situation. Within the complexity of food security, one issue that has always been difficult for me to understand is global trade, right? Global trade for me is this big thing that I have never been able to think and put it together and see how it really impacts the issue of food security in different parts of the world. How does global trade address or affect food security in Metro Atlanta, in Athens, in Ghana, in Spain, in Egypt? How does global trade affect that? I have been joking with my kids that finally there has been a problem about global trade that I have been able to understand. And the problem of global trade that I have been able to understand is what happened with the ship in the Suez Canal last week that was essentially threatening and creating an incredible problem on global trade. I mean, there were things that were at the verge of collapse, and the problem was very simple, right? There is a ship that is blocking the Canal Suez, is they are stuck. So the problem was very simple. We understood what the problem was. However, the solution was not that simple. So even if the problem is even if the problem is very simple, a ship is stuck, it was even daunting to solve it because we didn't have the proper tools. This image really shows, right? We know what the problem is, but look how big this ship is and how little and small and sometimes not powerful the tools that we have to solve the problem. So imagine if in a problem that is understood, like there is a ship that is stuck, we had so much problem to solve. Imagine if we do not even understand the problem. Imagine if the problem is so complex that we don't understand it. So we do need to have teams that are diverse and rich enough that will help us understand the problem. And then teams that are rich and complex and diverse enough that are going to help us solve that problem. So again, back to the objective one, examining critical diversity elements impacting discussions about food security. I want you always to remember at least those 5 elements: communication issues, the perspective, the context, the power, and the complexity of the problem. All right. So let me give you an example of putting an issue all together. Probably all of you have heard in the past about the Irish potato famine. The first time that I heard about the Irish potato famine, I learned about it when I was in school, and I was taking a plant pathology and plant genetics. It was a general crop science class. And in the general crop science class, what they told me was that the Irish potato famine was caused because all the potatoes in Ireland at the time were not genetically diverse. They all came from 3 tubers, and the 3 tubers were not resistant to Phytophthora infestans. And therefore, when the blight came, all the potatoes got affected and infected. They didn't have the treatment, and therefore the potatoes got sick. The potatoes died. People didn't have potatoes to eat, and people died. So when I learned about the Irish potato famine, I learned that it was a plant genetics, plant pathology, and crop management problem. I was an ag student, and that's how I looked at it. Later on, when I read more about the Irish potato famine, and I'm sorry I forgot to put an H over there, I don't know why, probably didn't have my glasses on, I learned much more. I learned that the reality is that at the time of the Irish potato famine, Ireland was exporting food to England. I also learned that the landlords who were English did not have problems with food. Only the Irish people who were extremely poor, who didn't own land, who didn't have jobs other than farming in the little plot, who didn't have the ability to have voting rights or ownership rights, they were the ones who were hungry. So Irish people were hungry, Irish people were dying, but the English were okay, and Ireland was exporting food at the time. So there is this awesome quote from John Mitchell, who was a 19th century Irish revolutionary, who says, "The Almighty indeed sent the potato blight, but the English created the famine." The only reason why there was a famine was because the Irish people had no rights, no power, no resources, no voice, no land ownership, no solutions to their situation. So it was an economic, a powerful, a social issue rather than an agricultural issue. So depending on who will speak, will have that perspective of discipline, will have that perspective of the lenses in which you see it. There was a power issue, there was a communication collaboration issue, there was a context issue that unless you understand the context of Ireland at the moment of the potato famine, you will never understand really what was going on. All right, so at this time I would pause to ask if you have questions, but let's move on and then we can have enough time to address all the questions. The next thing I want to talk to you is about analyzing the different dimensions of global food security. And I have 5 minutes to talk about this, so I'm going to simplify, but I really think that the image I'm going to give you is important. That's not the image I want to give you. It doesn't have order, it doesn't have an ability to see how do I envision the causes of global food security or global food insecurity. I'm going to have three, and then I'm going to have three overarching themes. The first one is, for us to have people who are not hungry, to have food security, we need to have available food. This is what people in the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences are going to be studying the most, right? We need to have available food. We can have available food by local food production, local agriculture, super important. By exchanging capacity, I might not be producing my own food, but if I produce something else, I might be able to have a domestic market, exchange my goods with food produced elsewhere in my same country, or I might be able to import from another country. So that exchange capacity, if I don't produce the food, that's okay. I could just buy it. The other one is, I might have a problem one year, but if I have the abilities to store food from year to year, I might be okay. So if I am in a place where I have natural disasters, maybe I have to invest in storage and food stocks capacity. Okay. And another way, which is not the best one, but it is a way by which we have food available, is by food aid. Somebody sends it to me, not by exchange, but by donation. So to be able to have food and to be able to have people who are food secure and not hungry, we need to have availability of food, however you get it. The ideal one would be local food production. Okay. The next one would be access. It doesn't matter how much food I have in a region. If I don't have access to that food, it doesn't matter, okay? So I could be having tons and tons and tons of tomatoes of the harvest of that year, but if a community doesn't have physical ability to go to the market, if there are no roads to go to the market, if there is a flood and the roads are not habilitated to go to the market, if we don't have a market, if I don't have my own transportation to go to the market, it doesn't matter how much food there is, I'm still going to be hungry. So availability of food is not enough. It is one condition. The next one needs to be access. So I need to have physical access. I also need to have economic access. There might be roads, there might be markets, but if I don't have the money to buy that food, I can't access that food. If I have a job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, but the money that those jobs give me are not enough for me to actually purchase that food, it doesn't matter how much food there is, I am still hungry. Another one is access of opportunity. I might be able to have the money, I might be able to have the roads, but the market only opens 1 hour a day, and that 1 hour a day, I'm at work. Okay, or there's a market, I have the money, but in the market, I am not allowed in the market because there is racism, or I am afraid to go to the market because there is problems with females and in a specific region of not being able to travel by themselves. Okay, and the other one is the issue of knowledge. Do I know what access opportunities do I have? Okay, so the next one would be, how do I use that money? That food? Do we have appropriate processing of the food? I was collaborating once with people in poultry science, and one of the things that they thought it was very important, it was the idea of how do we ensure that the people who are producing the chickens have the ability to have appropriate transportation to go to the market in very short periods of time. So we know that those raw materials, those chickens or those materials are not now full of salmonella or are safe to eat. It's issues of food safety, it's issues of water, safe drinking water, is issues of hygiene and practices, farm to fork, at home and in the farm and in the transportation and in the market. It's issues of diet quality and diversity. We might be able to have a lot of food, but only corn. That's not diverse enough to have proper diets. And then also the relationship with food, personal and community relationship with food. Without those things, it doesn't matter if I have access, and it doesn't matter if I have availability. If I do not have proper utilization of the food that I have available, we have a problem. And then finally, the overarching themes, I would say, we go back to the idea of food politics. We talked about the power issues, sovereignty, fairness, equity, justice. We also talk about the idea of stability of supply and access. We could have a region where we have a lot of production of food, lots of markets. We also have proper utilization, but they are in an area where there is a lot of natural disasters. Weather and variability can impact communities that otherwise are perfectly food secure. Suddenly they lose everything they have. We also could have issues of political factors and conflict, issues that are areas that have enough production, that have enough transportation, that have enough money. But if there is a conflict, you lose that availability, you lose the access, and you lose the utilization. And then also price fluctuations. There are some countries where the price fluctuations are so that today you might be able to have access to that food, and tomorrow the value of your money has been devalued to 1/10 of what you had yesterday. And then finally, the idea of long-term sustainability. It doesn't matter how well you use it, how much access you have, or how much availability you have, if you do not do it in a way that tomorrow and the next generation have the same access, the same availability, you are not food secure. Those are good, but I don't like this because it doesn't still give me an idea of what it means to have a community that is food secure. So what I have done is I've put it for you in this image, and I really like it because it shows you in this big circle surrounding is that you will not have food security, which is the circle, unless you have everything that is inside the bubble, okay? Unless you have availability, unless you have access, unless you have utilization, appropriate food politics, long-term sustainability, and you have stability of supply and access. This is daunting, and nobody can address everything. That goes that idea of the disciplinary expertise, the collaboration between groups. We might have people who are hungry who can address the issue of availability, but unless the issue of infrastructure is addressed from a policy and political perspective in an area, you're not going to solve the problem. Unless education addresses issues of food safety or infrastructure addresses issues for food safety, you are not going to have food security. So you have to think about everything at the same time, but you also should address this. It's a complex issue. How about if we tackle the pieces of that framework in different steps? Okay, so those are the dimensions of food security. So we go to objective 3, which is discuss some examples of food security. And that takes us to 3 examples that I'm going to address very fast, but because they relate directly to some of the things that I've talked about, diversity and the filters. So the 3 examples that I want to address, one of them is the idea, the Sustainable Development Goals are 17 goals that address poverty, hunger, and many different needs to address problems around the world. The second sustainable goal is zero hunger, and that's the one I wanted to talk about it. The question is, can we address Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is zero hunger just through agriculture? The Zero Hunger Sustainable Development Goal, it's a little bit longer than zero hunger. It says, end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So the question is, if we double agricultural production in an area, will we reduce hunger? Okay, so that's the one thing that as a person who works in ag, as students who work in ag, you always think that ag is super important to address hunger. So let's go back to the framework that I showed you a minute ago, and let's think, will we reduce hunger if we address it through agriculture? And I want to look at it through a lens of inequalities, of a lens of diversity. So I have some questions. So I double production. Well, am I doubling production for who? Those double U's that I told you. Who is doubling production? Is that farmer who exports all the food doubling production? Think about the potato famine, right? They were producing enough food, but they were exporting it to England while the Irish people were dying of hunger, literally dying. And then some people were emigrating to the United States. So who owns the land where we're doubling that production? are the small farmers able to double the agricultural production, or is it just the large farmers? So what is the technology that is helping us double production? Is that technology just accessible and available to the rich and well-funded farmers, or is it for everybody? So the first question in terms of diversity would be, are there suitable agricultural technologies available for small farmers? The next question in terms of diversity and equity and justice, and also ethics is, do we have relatively equitable distribution of farmland? So if we have 1,000 people, who owns the land? Is it just in the hands of one person, or is it in the hands of 1,000 people? If it's only in the hands of one person, it does not matter if you double agricultural production, a food insecure area will continue to be food insecure. Next question would be, are there efficient, widespread rural markets that are linked to regional and international trade circuits? One of my very first projects that I worked on, I saw people, small farmers, improve their agricultural production, producing much better, but then they were not able to sell their produce to the market. They were not able to take it to the market, export it, sell it, and they essentially produce something. They spend time, money, resources, land, producing something, and they were not able to sell it in the market. That was one of my first projects. And then 2 years ago, I went to Paraguay, and I was talking to the farmers there, and they told me that the biggest problem they had was not of proper agricultural techniques, technologies, knowledge, access to land, but they had no buyers. Paraguay is it's a landlocked country, so the transportation is super expensive. They can't sell it. So the problem is this idea of access to the markets and international trade circuits. So again, it's this idea of inequality. Another question would be, do people have the right to define their own food, to decide what their agricultural system, what's that doubling production? Is it corn that is sold in the international market, or can I decide what I'm producing and what I'm eating? That's also important in defining food security. Another one is there knowledge on proper diet and nutritional care, and who has access to that knowledge, and who has the ability to decide what to eat, and what do they have enough resources to be able to use that knowledge? And then finally, are there sanitation and health services available? Even if we double food production, unless people have access to safe drinking water, unless people have access to sanitation and health services, we are not going to solve the problem of food security unless we also address the issue of health. So we see that it is not just about doubling production. We need to be looking at all these questions of inequality with all the bubbles of the framework that I showed you. The other one goes much more close to home. It's more what's happening in the United States. Many of you might have heard this issue of the food deserts, right? You've heard the issue of the food deserts, which explains that it's a place where there's no fresh food available, or supermarkets with fresh food, close to a mile if you're in an urban area, or 10 miles if you're in a rural area. The problem is that the food desert does not really address all these elements that I told you about. A food desert doesn't address context, doesn't address power issues, doesn't address many things. So I have this quote from Eric Jackson, who works in Baltimore in the Black Yield Institute, and he says, if we think about deserts, we might give people the resources to eat that food, but we are not going to build the power to solve the problem. So in terms of the food deserts, I'm going to read this quote because I think it's worth as a quote. So it's from Karen Washington, and she says, so when we talk about food apartheid, so food apartheid is a term that really helps understand the disparities and discrimination, if you wish, in terms of access to food security in the United States. So when we talk about that food apartheid, the reason why we bring it up is because food desert doesn't cut it. Food desert doesn't open up the conversation, remember communication, the conversation that we need to have when it comes to race, when it comes to income inequality, when it comes to so much. So I will not read these to you, but I do want to address one piece here in terms of the food apartheid. The distinction between the food desert and the food apartheid is super important because language matters when we decide policies, when we decide what it is that, how do we understand that problem? How do we understand the context? How we will look at solutions? It is very critical to be very intentional about the definitions and at understanding that the problems of food apartheid are problems of racism, are problems of systemic inequalities. And they are not problems about geographic situation. It's not just a problem about putting a grocery store. It's so much more than that. All right. So then finally, the third one is the idea of food inequality and what has happened in the pandemic. Another quote from Navarro and Little is, people of color are at greater risk of COVID-19. Systemic racism in the food system plays a role. And I'm going to go to the next one. This slide is from an article that I read not too long ago, which was looking at COVID-19 and the disparities in nutrition. And it does look at COVID-19, and you know that I think that the deaths and hospitalizations in the United States of COVID-19 of African Americans has been 34% of the hospitalizations are of African Americans, but the population in the United States, I think it's 13.4, something like this. So clearly, it is completely unbalanced. And it is because African Americans have been more impacted by COVID-19. A lot of the reason of that is because of long-standing disparities in nutrition, in food security, in access to food. It's social determinants, it's health reasons, because the long-standing disparities in nutrition of African Americans, they are more impacted by obesity, by chronic diseases, not just nutrition, but stress, racial inequalities. Those are factors that have determined their health, the health situation, because of these disparities of African Americans make them more impacted by COVID-19. You also have less access to healthy food, less access to health care. All these things together have made that food inequality be one of the big problems in the United States, why African Americans have been more impacted by COVID-19. And then we have, if you look at these numbers, we have the situation before the pandemic and then after the pandemic and the projections now. We see that for all groups, the food insecurity increased during the pandemic. But if you look at African Americans, Black individuals compared to white individuals, the disparity in food insecurity is, it's daunting. All right, so I do not have a fourth example, but I do want to give all of you as students a challenge in terms of the next example. The next example is, what is that challenge that you find yourself in terms of food security and inequality? What's the situation in your community? What's the challenge that you want to look into, to address, to be part of the solution? What's going to be your role? And then the next question is, how can you best prepare for these? I had a guest speaker many years ago to one of my classes, and he was one of my heroes, right? And one of the students really loved his presentation, and then they asked him, so Dr. Sanchez, what do I have to do to be you? I mean, that's what the student asked. What do I have to do to be you? And he said, it doesn't matter. You can address food insecurity, you can address poverty from any discipline, from any field. I don't have a recommendation of what's your major, but not even within the College of Ag, what's your major? It doesn't matter. What he said is that what you need to do is to have this presentation card. Let's see, where are my presentation cards? Here. To have this presentation card that says, my name is Maria Navarro, and I am really good at this. And I can give you the depth, I can give you that perspective, I can give you that context on this situation. And in collaboration with others, I can address this thing. So it's not about what major you have. Any major, any discipline can address the issue of food security. When I started my career, I was an agricultural engineer. I worked in the field, I worked in Africa, I worked in development, and then now I'm a teacher. So you would say, but now you don't work anymore in food security, right? You're just a teacher. I said, well, you know, you cannot address a problem unless you have educated people, educated politicians, educated parents, educated decision makers, educated private sector individuals who understand the problem, who want to impact the problem, who address their knowledge and their experience to address a problem. So anybody can. You just have to be good, have to be engaged, have to be integrating your issues with others and collaborate with others to solve the problem. So anybody can participate in the issue. So here are, again, my 3 objectives. I hope I address some of your questions. Examining critical diversity elements impacting discussions of food security, analyzing the different dimensions of global food security, and discussing examples of food security inequalities. So let me unshare this. And here I am.
Dr. Navarro, thank you so much for the time you spent. I'm going through all of that information. I've learned a ton. I didn't have a big enough notes page, so I started on an index card, then I grabbed a notebook paper. So I definitely got a lot of great information from that presentation. We want to invite all participants, go ahead and go to that Q&A. I see we already have one question started, but if you have any questions at all, please feel free to go ahead and start typing them in. We have an expert with us right now, so definitely utilize that to your advantage while we have her, and go ahead and start adding questions on the Q&A feature here on Zoom, and we'll address all of those.
Should I look at the questions myself, or do you want to read them? How do you want to do that?
We will read them out to you. You can also look at them there. I think Dr. Player is going to start with the first one.
Yes, I add my gratitude, Dr. Navarro. Our first question is from Dr. Navarro. When talking about the dimensions of food security, where does storage and home safety play in? For example, refrigerators, safe heating, pest-free storage, etc. And then that leading to utilization, kind of more down to that individual's needs.
That's actually a great question, because I did not address too much the individual perspective, right? So when I was talking about storage and food stocks, I was thinking about a community perspective. So the framework that I showed you was a community framework, if you wish. This community, what does need to happen in this community so that the community can be. So the food storage, that was a perspective. I would say that from the individual home storage, refrigerator, safe heating, it would go probably more in the utilization piece. Can I keep the food that I bought safe in my house and in my refrigerator and all that? So yes, you're right. It would be more on the utilization. However, if you think, for example, in the United States, I think this is super relevant. We talk about people saying that processed food is cheaper and McDonald's is cheaper. The reality is that if you have enough money, it's not cheaper, because you can buy a big lettuce and put it in your refrigerator, which is, you already have the refrigerator. But if you're homeless, you cannot buy lots of things and keep them anywhere. So you do not have the tools to keep that food safe. So that's also part of access, right? The refrigerator gives you access to safe food and to healthy food. So really the individual piece, I would say a refrigerator could be proper utilization, a refrigerator could be access, and a refrigerator could be also availability. Think about this. One of the things I was most helpful, most thankful when the pandemic situation started is that I have a big chest freezer, right? So I didn't have to go every day to the grocery store, and I felt safe. So that's important. That goes home safety play. Home safety, I didn't talk about safety, but if people don't feel safe to go to the market, it addresses the idea of access. If I don't feel safe to go and produce my food, In places where there is conflict, for example, the availability is not there, not because they don't have the land, not because they don't have the knowledge, not because they don't have the tools, it's because they don't feel safe. And am I going to address and plant a crop if I think that somebody's going to come and burn it tomorrow? So these things, it goes all together. But that's an incredible, very good question. Very good, Sophia.
Dr. Navarro, we're going to move down to one question. How does the issue of food waste impact food security?
That is also excellent. So, and I love this issue. I don't have time to talk about everything, but there's two things. And I'm going to say it's not just food waste, but it's also food loss. Okay. So food waste and food loss together, they account for 1/3 of what we produce worldwide. In the United States, we have more food waste. And if you were sub-Saharan Africa, they have more food loss. But together, worldwide is about 1/3 of what we produce. So if we just divide by half, if we have the amount of food waste and food loss, we would be in a situation that we are producing way more than what we need for everybody on Earth to not be hungry. We just have to have food waste and food loss. Now, then you have distribution issues. So I would say food waste and food loss are incredible, but not so much from the perspective of food security, but from the perspective of the impact of agriculture in global warming. So if we reduce food waste and food loss, the impact would be, the decrease in impact would be so big. So when people say we need to improve, I'm a scientist, so yes, we need to improve the science, but not necessarily to produce more, but to produce better, to have less impact in global warming, to lose less food, so my answer to you is food waste. It's not so much about the science, but about changing consumer behavior. And I think that is that's a responsibility that it's also rooted in privilege, right? Unless we understand the privilege in the impact that we have on others, we're not going to change. So it's important that we analyze food waste from what does it mean to other people around me, not just so much to my economy. So 1/3 of what we produce is wasted or lost, and science and consumer behavior could change that very, very much. And it's, for me, one of the most important and easiest steps that we could take to address the problem.
Dr. Navarro, we now have a question that kind of is in the moment. You showed the picture of the Suez Canal incident, and obviously that's impacted some countries more than others immediately. But this question is, where is the largest imbalance in food security in the world right now? So presently, where would you see some of those largest imbalances that you've talked about in your presentation?
I would like to ask, what's imbalance?
I think what they're talking about is the extremes of the aspects you talked about regarding inequalities, access. So, and I think you brought up a number of issues that could lead to this. So I guess maybe, are there some hot spots where some of these concepts you've talked about are really expressing themselves currently in the globe?
Yeah, I would say that if you think about, okay, so we could talk about before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. So if we think about where the more systemic food insecurity that we have in the world right now, I would say it's sub-Saharan Africa, but also in some small island states, and in some areas of Asia, maybe some areas of Latin America. But if we think about where there's biggest concentration, it probably would be in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, that does not mean imbalance, because in a way, in some places, there's a lot of equality in food insecurity, right? The problem that I see is that the imbalance can be looked at where there is more people who are food insecure, and I would say sub-Saharan Africa, or in some East Asia, But you could also look at imbalances. Where is the situation where there are some people who have too much and some people who have too little, where it doesn't make sense that the systemic inequality keeps happening when it should not happen. And that, I would say, it's everywhere. But the United States is one of the situations where you say, how can we have what we have? And it is really, truly, this idea of the food apartheid, it brings this idea of systemic, rooted in racism situations of inequality that is a complete imbalance. This does not mean that in the United States we have the higher percentage of people who are food insecure, because you cannot compare the food insecurity in the United States with what some of the things that is happening in other places of the world. So depending on what you mean by imbalance, but I would say if you think about food insecurity, think about areas that have been most impacted by climate change, things that are under conflict, and think about areas that have been impacted by lack of political stability.
Very good. Another question here addresses your final comments regarding you being an educator and teaching others. This question is, have you seen or what impacts or roles possibly that misinformation or false narratives or inaccurate fear-based information may have on individuals and stakeholders in their decision-making in such ways? Examples may be of something like the Dirty Dozen list, where individuals are afraid of certain foods or not making choices. But just that idea of there's so many sources of information out there that people are receiving and can sometimes lead to decisions that may impact food security. So the idea of educating misinformation and how that might impact, again, this seems a little more individual, but I guess it could be systems based also.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me put it this way. And this is again, it would be very centric, right? I think I'm right. And this idea, what I was talking about, the co-creation, you cannot find a solution by telling people what they should do. This is the whole idea. Now, I think that if the world ate more insects, we would have much less problems of improper diet, unbalanced diet, protein deficiencies, and we will have to produce less, and we will have less impact on global warming. So I would tell you, what happens if I tell you tomorrow you should eat some roaches and the world will be better off, right? So however, within this, I need to go back to this idea that I told you, that communication, that collaboration is super important. And I do not own the truth, and I do not own the reason or the ability to tell people what they should be doing. So I think that, I don't know if I understand, but I think that it's important that we accept that people's decision-making on what they eat is important. Now, however, there is a lot of misinformation and there is a lot of issues that are important to address. For example, and I don't know if this is what the question was going, but I haven't had to address this issue for a long time, and I was really tired of talking about it. But the whole thing about GMOs, yes, GMOs, no, right? I got really tired of this thing, because at the beginning you would hear different people, depending on where they are, make arguments that were ridiculous. One time, and I'm not kidding, one time I heard somebody saying that genetically modified crops would make you change your brain and you would make stupid decisions, okay? Things like this. It's like there's this organism that goes to your brain and does things. So this is ridiculous. But then I hear people in ag or wherever who are for genetically modified crops, and they say, those people are stupid, it's ridiculous, it's stupid, and genetically modified crops would change and would eliminate hunger around the world, and the problem would be gone. And I say, you know, this is not part of the conversation either, because you need to understand that hunger is not an issue of production. It's not just an issue of producing more. We go back to that framework that I showed you. Even if you have enough production, people who are hungry might not have access to these. People who are hungry might not have the ability to have a balanced diet. So for me, is that misinformation sometimes goes from both sides. And unless we get to that collaboration, that talk, that discussion, that analysis, why are you afraid of these? Will I understand it? And is it rooted in economics? Is it rooted in not understanding science? But people who are focused on the science, they need to understand also the social issues, the inequality issues, the cultural issues, the education issues, the capitalism issues. So we all need to think that I don't have the solution and I need to listen to the other perspective. I don't know if I answered the question, but I think that a more valid conversation is important in all situations. And thinking that the other person is simply ignorant is not okay.
Dr. Navarro, I believe that brings it right back to your beginning opening, that there are going to be more questions and challenges than there are solutions. And so just considering that and your closing comments to really consider others, where they are, what they're thinking, what they're doing is ultimately that. So we cannot thank you enough for your comments. And I've asked Dr. Jean Bertrand, and I want to acknowledge Dr. Bertrand is the individual who identified Dr. Navarro to be our presenter today. And so I've asked Dr. Bertrand if she would just share a few comments on behalf of the college, Dr. Navarro, for you, and our appreciation to you. Dr. Bertrand.
Thank you very much, Dr. Player. I too wish to thank Dr. Navarro, who is a very dear friend of mine from the University of Georgia and a colleague. And I enjoyed working with her so much, and I knew that she would deliver the very thought-provoking talk that she did. I couldn't help reflect as you were talking about how most of us on this call just have no experience with food insecurity. We are so fortunate to live in this country, and most people in this country have access to food. But I was thinking about the beginning of the pandemic last year, and I remember going to the grocery store one time, and there was no fresh chicken available. And that it was so striking to me. And so I went to the frozen food aisle, and there was some packaged frozen chicken that I bought. But you know, I've been to the grocery store many times in my life, and I don't remember many of those trips, but I remember that trip to the grocery store where there was no fresh chicken. And so, but there was frozen chicken, so I was fine. But just a reflection on how fortunate we are in this country, but how good it is for us to hear these types of talks and to reflect on the food insecurity issues that are so dominant in the world today. So Dr. Navarro, thank you again for joining us this evening and for that very thought-provoking talk that you presented to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bertrand. And in concluding here, because the TIDE conference does look at inclusion and diversity, I've invited Julian Nixon, who represents that aspect in CAFLS and works in the William Bookart Student Services Center, for Julian just to share some of the activities he's got going on and also to make you students aware of his role in the college. So Julian, thank you for being here, and please take a moment to share about your role for CAFLS.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to try to keep this brief. I just wanted to let you know that, I'm really excited about this year for diversity and inclusion in CAFLS. This year, we're providing IDI training for faculty and staff and students to engage and grow in intercultural communication and collaboration. We are diversifying our recruitment efforts by partnering with a number of different programs and organizations such as the 4-H Pinckney Leadership Program, Tiger Alliance, Emerging Scholars, This month, we just launched the CAFLS Fireside Chat, which allows us to have informative and intimate diversity conversations with admitted students and their families. And our retention efforts have been virtual, like